Hello, can you hear me, everybody in the back? Yes, excellent. Just checking. Okay, so thank you all for being here. It means that either you are suffering from addiction or you know somebody who has an addiction. It's interesting for me because as an addict myself, I have 8 years clean now, 8.5. I still get a very poor sense of myself because a society sees us as evil or wrong. And in truth, I'm sick. And if you are sitting there and you have a darkness inside of you, I can identify with that because there's a darkness inside of me. But it's something I wrote about. I said the darkest of men carry the brightest of light, which means if you have that potential, you have the potential to do great things. So if you are sitting there with darkness, don't be afraid of it. So I was 19 years old when I first died. It's weird for me to say that, but my heart stopped, and I didn't die just once. The ambulance resuscitated me, and then I think about 2 or 3 minutes later, it stopped again. And what I remember, I mean, of course, I didn't know I was dead. I remember feeling so warm, and I felt loved and cared for, and I felt complete. And I have to, it's the only word I can describe as that feeling, because now, being alive, I feel incomplete, unfinished. I have work to do, but in this moment, it all ceased to exist. And when I woke up in the hospital, I was pissed because I felt like they ripped me out of heaven. And I wasn't pissed because, they brought me back to life. I was pissed because I woke up and I was an addict and the hell wasn't over. I remember looking down at myself. It was the 90s, so I was a polo raver, if you know what that is. And I had blood on my polo shirt and suction cups on me, and I was like, God, what happened? And when they put me in this mental institution after, I was in the hospital for days and I knew something terrible had happened. And I was already trying to manipulate the doctor into getting the medications I was addicted to. Medication, great word. And he was like, no, we're not changing anything for you. This is, you're an addict and you need to get help, and you died. And I was like, bullshit, I didn't die. And he's like, I'm like, you're just trying to scare me. And he's like, no, you seriously, you were clinically dead twice, and your mother found you. And I was like, wow. And then I thought he was just trying to scare me, but, and then like any 19-year-old, I was like, I beat death. Like, how powerful am I? So that didn't change me, that didn't stop me. That was like, like I say, I was a self-taught anesthesiologist, and I made a few mistakes in my practice. So yeah. But the interesting thing is I was the least likely to end up an addict. Like, if you knew me when I was a child, I was I'm from Boston, which is awesome, by the way, that you're all from New England, because normally when I do this, I can't say car, like I have to say car. So this is, and everyone's like, what is that? So this is great for me. But I grew up, I was very American looking, and I was the baby, and it was the 1984 Olympics, and I was watching television. I was 7 years old, and if you remember, if you're as old as me or older, it was Bart Connor and Mary Lou Retton were on it, and I saw it, and it was as if the TV screen like jumped out and strangled me and was like, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Like, I knew it in the same way that when musicians touch their first instrument, they know deep inside of them that this is what they're supposed to do. So I grabbed all the cushions off the couch and I started trying to mimic what I saw. And it was weird because it was almost as if I knew how to do it, the movement. Like, I did it in like a past life, and I was just uncovering, what I once did. So I got good really fast. And I didn't go to gymnastics practice yet because my parents, they just, I was a little kid flipping around, no big deal. But I got good fast, and they were like, okay, we need to take him somewhere. So I went to gymnastics practice, and they put me on the team immediately. And from there, my life, my little 7-year-old life, completely changed. It turned into this very rigorous, competitive, beautiful thing, because I loved it. I loved the movement. It was like there was a fire inside of me. There is a relationship between movement and drugs, which I'll talk about later. So when I was 11, I went to the Olympic Training Center because I was winning. I was winning states and regionals, and I was an Olympic hopeful. And my parents owned a bar right outside of Boston, and it was so awesome as a kid because I was the owner's son. And you felt like a celebrity, you know, like everybody knew you. But the gymnastics place I took class at was so close to the restaurant that my mom couldn't drive me home, so I would do my homework at the end of the bar. And it was this big, like island kind of bar. So I would do my homework with drunks, and that was my adult interaction. Yeah, and I loved it, because you don't know when you're a child, you know, you don't know these people are intoxicated, and they were always so nice, you know, they were always, yeah, and very interested. And then what would happen was my parents started to become part of the thing they owned, which happens to us all. So their drinks were getting later and later and later. So I'd be sitting there till midnight, you know, doing my homework with alcoholics. And I'd have school in the morning, and you know, when you're young, you have to get up for school at like 6 a.m. It's awful, actually. But I wasn't getting home at a normal time, so it really started to affect me. And I don't blame my parents at all for my addiction. I just am telling you this because it changed my perspective on how I see addiction. So very early on, I saw the dangerous effects of alcohol, and I was like, I'm never going to become that. Like, look how bad it's destroying my family. And like any alcohol story, my family, it ended in divorce. It ended in DUIs. They lost the business because they didn't pay their taxes. True Italians. But it was actually really awful. And so when my father left, and it was just me and my mom is the most beautiful woman because she's my mom, but she's a very, very, very bad alcoholic. And so I would watch this woman drink her heartbreak, you know, to fill the empty void. And I was like, I'm never going to become that, ever, ever, ever. So I clung to gymnastics as if it was my religion, you know, because it was my freedom. So a little fast forward, when I was 13 years old, I went back to the Olympic Training Center. And this time, I wasn't winning as much because all those other little gymnasts out there in the country had the same dreams I had. It was very humbling. Like, I wasn't the only one that wanted to be this thing. So I was like, shit, I gotta work harder. But that was their thing. I mean, it's very competitive. So this kind of like competition began to bleed into my being. And gymnastics is very unusual because you're given a score, right? And everyone can see your score. It's almost like your imperfections. It's like they show you like 8.0 and everyone sees it. So that's kind of like, and a 10 back in the day was perfect. It's changed now. But so I was like, shit, I have to be perfect, or else people are going to judge me and they're going to give me a score. And this kind of like perfectionism began to bleed into all my thoughts. And I'm not saying gymnastics is bad or any sports are bad. They're not. But given that I am who I am, I took it to a dark place. So around 15 years old, I, you know, like most 15-year-olds, I was extremely depressed. Actually, I can say wicked depressed here. I've been like trying to curb that word so bad. I don't have to. All right, I was wicked fucking depressed. So, and it was the 90s, and I told my mother, I was like, there's something wrong with me. Like, there's something seriously wrong with me. It was starting to affect my gymnastics, and she's like, no, it's your generation, it's the 90s, you listen to Nirvana. You know, it was, and seriously, and I was like, no, Mom, really, like, I think about killing myself. And in truth, I did. And what I realized is I didn't want to die, but I wanted relief, you know? And I think people that do commit suicide, they run out of options, or what they believe are options. And that's how I felt. So I didn't know what to do. I wanted to make the Olympics more than anything in the whole world. But this darkness, and you know, I had no parental support because my parents were really bad shaking drunks by then. I took my first drink, like regular high school kind of setting. And my parents were never home because they were at the bar. And that drink changed my fucking life. Like, when Catholic people or religious people say they found God, like, I found God. It was the solution, and I was never, ever, ever going to put it down. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to go to the Olympics. I could just be me. I didn't know that was alcoholic thinking. I had no idea. I was just like, this is fantastic. So I drank alcoholically on the weekends, and my coach immediately began to say, you know, I know what you're doing because I know your family. And he's like, you're really destroying something God gave to you. And you know, I was angry. It was the 90s, whatever. So when someone tells you that, you just kind of do one of these and keep drinking, because that's what we do in Boston. And other places, it seems. But so fast forward, I started smoking pot, very recreational. And, you know, that was cool. It was a different perspective. But something interesting happened at that time. It was that 90s rave thing, if you remember that. And it really changed my life because it was as if heaven had crashed into the earth. Like, a rave to me was so opposite of gymnastics. You know, we're very clean cut, and then, you know, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but everyone at the rave had blue hair and they had piercings. So, and it was just like this, like, I had arrived, you know, the moment when you're like, this is what life is. So I started taking ecstasy and acid, and my entire body was pierced. And it was troubling back then because, oh yeah, every part of my body. And scars to prove it. But I was getting deductions in gymnastics because this isn't what, you know, the judges were like, what the hell is this? Because nobody, you know, you couldn't have tattoos then. It was that time for that sport. It's changed a bit, thank God. And I'd like to think I changed it, but I didn't. Anyways, I realized during that time I wasn't going to the Olympics, and to me, that was the most humbling, painful aspect, because that was my purpose. That's all I wanted to do. It didn't matter if I was good or smart in school. All I wanted to do was go to the Olympics, and it's not happening. So my belief from that moment was every day for the rest of my life, I'm a failure, and I cannot repair this. That's a shitty belief to have. But I didn't know, you know, no one told me that, like, hey, there's other things you can do, or this is the end of the world. So I hit hard to drugs. I went to college, and in truth, and telling you all the truth, I only went to college, and maybe some of you went for the same reason, for a place to live. I couldn't live with my mother anymore. She was a bottoming out alcoholic, and I wanted to keep doing gymnastics, and they were like, yeah, you're still good. We'll give you a scholarship, you know, come to this school. And it was awesome. It was like a free place to live. And I immediately started dating this guy who was a coke dealer. So yeah, you know how this story ends. And you know, for an entire year I said I would never ever do it, but we become the people we hang out with mostly, or I did. And everything from cocaine really hit a bottom. It was my first true addiction. Addiction to me is the most powerful thing I've ever had inside of me. You know, when you see those like movies about possession or whatever, that's what it felt like. There was something so hungry inside of me that it's going to make me do things I would never dream of. And I did them all. And I'm not ashamed because I'm human. It's just what I did, but I did them all. So I went to I continued doing Coke, and I was competing on the gymnastics team, and I'll tell this story because it's kind of funny. It was the NCAAs, the night before the NCAAs, and this girl had mushrooms, and mushrooms were like rare in our college for some reason, and I said, okay, can we take them after my competition? And she's like, no, I want to take them now, or I'm going to take them with someone else. So what would you do? Yeah. So my greatest thinking was like, these will wear off by the time you got to compete. They didn't. So there I was, tripping my face off, going, this is the NCAAs, this is so important. And I was like, I can't compete like this. Like, I'm seeing things on top of things, and I know they're not there. So my greatest thought was, well, maybe Coke will get rid of it. So at 7 in the morning, I did a bunch of Coke and then ran out, so Ritalin, you know. And I was like, I can't compete. I gotta come clean. And I had a moment of clarity. I had a moment of like, just tell your coach the truth. Like, this is your way out. Like, you know you have a problem. Like, you know, everyone knows you have a problem. So I went into his office, and it was like 9 a.m., and I knocked on the door, and if you've ever tripped, you know, it makes a very interesting sound. You know, it was like wobble, wobble, wobble. So I'm like giggling and kind of like trying to hold it all together. And I open it up, and his family's in there. His wife and 2 kids, like young, like 8 and I don't know, some just young. And I was like, hey, coach, I think we need to talk. And he's like, okay, come on in. And I was like, no, I think we need to talk alone. And he's like, okay. So he sends them out, and he's like, what's up, Joe? And I said, well, he was much older. So I said, I'm tripping. And he's like, what happened? You okay? And I'm like, no, I'm tripping. And like, he did not quite understand what I meant. And then I sort of explained it. And so this was my moment of coming clean. You know, I was like, look, I have a drug problem, and I need your help. And I think I only said that just because, like, well, I couldn't compete, you know, and I needed a way out. And he's like, well, go get your uniform on and just, you know, watch the team. I was like, no, like, I shouldn't even be in public. So from then, they were like, okay, well, you need to see the counselor. We're going to send you to rehab. And if you don't go to rehab, you can't come back to school and you lose your scholarship. So I was like, okay. You know, I was going to own up to this. Maybe there is a way to get rid of this thing inside of me. I did not think that was ever possible, by the way, ever, which is why I'm still amazed I'm sober. I went to my first rehab, and it was so retardedly like a Hallmark moment, because the girls' gymnastics team like made this huge banner, and it was like, are you serious? Like, yeah. I mean, they were, you know, they all meant well, but at the same time, I was like, no. Yeah, and I went, and I lasted 3 days because I was cured, you know? I saw other addicts that were worse than me, and I was like, oh no, this is not for me. And the counselor said to me, if you don't finish, you're going to lose your scholarship, and I guarantee you'll return as a heroin addict. And I was like, that's a nice wisdom. So I remembered this thing from Shawshank Redemption, because I was all like, thought I was profound, and I said some birds aren't meant to be caged because their colors are too bright. I can't believe I just remembered that. But yeah, thinking I like knew something about something, but knew nothing at all. Yeah, so, and I gave him his big book back, and yeah, I went back to school, and they kicked me out immediately, police escort. And so they said, you have to finish, part of the deal. So because of insurance, I did an outpatient thing. It was 3 months. I did it. I stayed sober. I felt better. I was running again. I was going to compete. They still wouldn't let me on campus. I was known as a drug addict. I liked that. And then they had me see a psychiatrist because they're like, can you sleep? And I was like, no, I've never been able to sleep, which is absolutely true. So this woman gave me, she started me on prescription, you know, for depression, which I should have been treated for when I was 15, but I self-medicated with alcohol and pot. And then she started giving me benzos. But it took a long time because I knew, like any good addict, I knew I could manipulate this woman. She took the motherly role with me that I always wanted. So I was like, if I say the right thing to her, she's going to prescribe exactly what I want and when I want, and she did. So she's like, have you ever heard of Klonopin? And I was like, no. But I had taken Klonopin and I knew exactly what it was all about. So holy crap, I've never gone to a pharmacy so fast in my entire life. And I ate them all because that's how we were taught to take them in Boston. And then I called her up and I was like, they didn't work. I think I need a bigger dosage. And she was like, okay. By the end of this, I was getting the highest dose with like unlimited refills, paid for by the state because I was something like I was disabled form. And I was so physically addicted that I was having seizures without them, which was really awful. I didn't know there were seizures at first until people were telling me. So I wasn't let back into school, but I was doing terrible things. If you've ever taken Klonopin, you don't know you're doing bad things because everything feels okay. You think it's okay to ask the bank teller where to get Coke because it seems safe and you really don't know. It's bizarre. So I did things like that and they kicked me out of school and and the problem was my parents wouldn't let me home anymore. They really wouldn't before that because we were like addicts, like bloodthirsty addicts hating each other, all on different substances. So I was homeless. And the homelessness was the worst thing ever. And this lasted for about 2 years. And I don't mean I was homeless for 2 years. I have to clarify that. I was in and out of men's shelters, homeless shelters, people's couches, drug dealers' couches. But homelessness, you have to understand, when you see someone homeless, I know we all want to help them. We do. We feel it. You see them, and it hurts. It hurts your heart. It hurts my heart. But you really feel nobody wants you. Nobody loves you. And it's weird, like nature mocks you when you're homeless. Like the things that should be beautiful aren't. That flower that just kind of peeks up from the crack. It's not beautiful because you are crushed down to nothing.